This is the national issue speech, and the title is Stress in America. We live in a world that never takes a breath. American culture is busy, fast-paced, and we have too much to do. Above this, we have no time to sit down and relax and just take a breath. The problem is this: we're stressed, and our culture largely ignores the issue of stress, and even pressures us into living stressful lifestyles. But we can overcome this challenge by challenging the way we think and the way we live. So let's explore the issue of stress in America and see what we can do about it. Firstly, stress is a prominent factor in American people, ranging from teenage years and on. According to a finding from the American Psychological Association, as reported on the Global Organization for Stress website, stress is a top health concern for U.S. teens between 12th and 9th grade. Psychologists say that if they don't learn healthy ways to manage that stress now, it could have serious long-term implications. Now, none of us in the audience are teenagers, but I wanted you to be aware that stress does affect children as young as high school age. Stress is also affecting adults. The Anxiety and Depression Association of America reports that anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the U.S., affecting 40 million adults in the United States aged 18 and older, which is 18% of the U.S. population. That's a lot of people who are worried. Now, most of us probably don't have an anxiety disorder, but we do know what it's like to be stressed and worried about the future. Stress is psychological and also affects our behavior. There are physical effects of stress, including heart problems, high blood pressure, susceptibility to infection, skin problems, pain, and diabetes. According to Jane Collingwood in the article, The Physical Effects of Long-Term Stress, found on Psych Central. So stress is a major issue, and it affects us in many ways. We've seen that American culture chooses to ignore stress and even condones a stressful lifestyle. But let us not settle for this unhealthy way of life. I have 2 suggestions about what we can do to live a less stressful life in this stressful world. The first one comes from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6, in which Jesus says, "Do not worry." Jesus uses 2 different illustrations to explain what he means. He talks about the birds of the air, and he also talks about the flowers of the field. For the birds, he says, they always have something to eat. And for the flowers of the field, he talks about how they're clothed in more splendor than even Solomon. Jesus then continues to ask his listeners this question: are you not much more valuable than they? And why he says this is he's trying to get his audience to change their minds. And that's the first thing we want to do when it comes to stress, is to change our mindset and change our perspective. To take a step back and look at the bigger picture, to stop worrying about the little details that might not be so important. The second thing that we want to do, now that we understand that Jesus cares for us and we can trust him, is to consider how we can change our behavior to improve our life. My inspiration for the second suggestion comes from the idea of taking a Sabbath, which is found in the story of creation in Genesis 1, as well as in God's instructions for the Israelites found in Exodus. Sabbath was a day set aside for the Israelites to rest. They weren't supposed to work, and they weren't supposed to prepare food on this day. They were supposed to simply just take a break and be still. We need to put time in our schedule to take a break, to stop working, to stop worrying, and to sit down and relax. Now, I know that it is probably not reasonable for many of us to take an entire day to carve out to not do any work. But what we can do is to take little bits of time in our schedule to intentionally set them aside to be still. Along with Sabbathing, we can simplify our lives so that we do have more time to take a break. In a busy world, the Lord has provided a way for us to relax and to find relief from stress. So let's review what we've talked about. We live in a busy culture. We can't change culture because we're surrounded by it, and it's comprised of many different things. So what can we do? Since stress is psychological, we talked about 2 different ways to address those effects. We can change our mindset and change our behavior. The solutions that were presented from the Bible were first in Matthew chapter 6 that talked about not worrying, and by broadening our perspective and looking at the bigger picture of things. The second solution was presented in talking about the Sabbath, where we can take a break, plan intentional time to stop work and just relax. It would be beneficial for us mentally and physically to take the wisdom provided by the scriptures and apply it to our lives. The truth is that our world is always going to be busy, and we're always going to feel pressure to do things. We're always going to have worries. But since we cannot control our circumstances, we can hand that control over to God and trust His sovereignty and care for us.